Now we go. Get up here. Okay, are y'all seeing that on your screen?
No, not yet.
Okay, hang on. Well, then I got to do this. Come on now. There we go. How's that? You see me now?
Yes, that's perfect.
Good. All right. So cultural awareness, sensitivity, diversity, and law enforcement chaplaincy. That's the title of this section. Cultures. What is a culture? Culture is a total way of life, not just a lifestyle, but of a people group, a design for living and coping in the world. Cultural diversion means within a dominant people group, that is America, for instance, certain members of a racial or cultural or religious or national special group create a culture. Within this subgroup, there's a sharing of cultural identity, a pride of identity, belonging, shared beliefs, shared worldview. How does culture work? It gives people a sense of connection. Very often it pertains to dress, and sometimes we don't know that, or we don't realize that there's a lot of kind of dress codes or dress signals that let somebody know that I'm a member of this group or that group. And appearance, likewise. There are certain rituals that people do, which is habitual actions that are formal and or semi-formal, and that mean that we all understand what we mean. Our church is an Anglican church, so actually we have rituals that's part of our procedure in worship. We have liturgy. I wear vestments, as opposed to probably most of you in ministry. That's a different looking thing. The look and the feel and the language is pretty ritualistic. But I'll tell you, every church has its ritual, whether they're aware of it or not. And it's kind of funny and cute to notice that. I was once at the neighborhood church at some big gathering event in the city. And I had been kind of picking up on this for a while, but I really noticed it one time when Larry Lane, the pastor there, was giving a message. And at the end of that, he said, "Now let's pray." And he took the microphone close to his lips and he made a tisk sound with his mouth. He went like that. And that sound system in that place, it really reverberated this huge sound like this. And everybody in the whole auditorium went, And so it was just, And that was the signal to prayer. It was just like a formal call to prayer that was being made by these two sounds that were not words, let's pray, amen, brother, or anything. It was just this two sounds. And I've seen that in other churches. And I thought, there is such a funny thing there, that there's a ritual for getting into the prayer mode that nobody ever thought of. Let's do this, and that'll call people to prayer. And I pointed it out to Larry, and I think we both had a good laugh about it. But we do have rituals. We do have roots, and we got history as well, and culture. So another way of looking at it is this set of symbols, that it's their language, of course, and culture. There's working schedules. If you're in, about Mexico, how they have a siesta time in the middle of the day because it's a very hot country. And they'll have a work period in the morning and 2 or 3 hours off in the midday, and then return to work in the afternoon. They do the same in the Middle East, as a matter of fact. I was staying in Dubai, an Arab country, for a few months. And that's what they did every year. They had a work time in the morning and they came home around noon, had a nice big meal, and then went and slept it off for a couple hours. And then went back to work, and they only got home around 8 o'clock in the nighttime, and had another big meal. Clothes and dress, of course, can denote all kinds of things, from gang colors to just what you do for a living. Manners can be certain with certain cultures, and where one culture calls for something to be done, another culture forbids that entirely. I know that shaking hands with people that you meet is normal in our culture. We would shake hands with anybody, and to fail to do that would look rude to us if we meet somebody new in a formal situation. But I went, as I said, to the Middle East, and to touch a woman's hand was to offend her greatly. So to hold my hand out to shake her hand, she'd either refuse it, and I'd wonder at that, or she'd shake my hand and everybody would get offended. So you have to know the culture that you're in and to know what that is. Jokes are particularly culture sensitive, because what's funny in our culture makes absolutely no sense in somebody else's culture, because these are all basically founded on cultural norms. And when we don't have that in common with somebody, our jokes don't make sense. In fact, they seem absurd or rude or tasteless. Celebrations, obviously, there's different times of year and things of significance that are celebrated in different cultures, not just political or historical events like our 4th of July, and religious events like Easter or Christmas. But there are cultural celebrations that say something about the culture. Again, in the Persian culture, my wife is Persian, so that's why I keep speaking like this. They have an annual week-long celebration called Nowruz, which means new day, at the spring equinox. And so right at the first day of spring, it begins. And all the Persians do this. It has nothing to do with Islam. It's just their celebration of a new day, because they celebrate the beginning of the new year on that day. And some of it is very good, because they'll bury the hatchet with people. They'll reconcile with folks. They'll it's just a very joyous time. Folk art obviously changes from people to people group. And if you can go in a farmer's market or something and see things that come out of a certain nation, you'll see the indicative marks of one culture or country over another. Food is obviously a cultural thing. And I think that America is rich for having all these cultures overlap and give us all these phenomenal different foods, which I've come to call all American food now, because we brought them into the melting pot, and we enjoy everything from Vietnamese to Indian to Mexican to Chinese to Taiwanese food, or all German or French cooking or Italian. Love it all. Child rearing methods can be different between cultures. Religion obviously is different. In fact, most religions, other than Christianity, are pretty much a cultural expression, and it keeps the people within the culture tied to the culture, and their religion is part of that culture. Whereas the first command Christ gave at the launching of his faith into the world was to go into all the world and teach this to all nations, let everybody know. So Christianity is the universal religion for all people in all cultures. Now, cultures are coping systems. The world is scary. It's large. It's challenging, and our culture sometimes gives us a place to seek and hide and be within it. It does give us an explanation for who we are, how we got here, why we are valid people. We have a cultural history, established values, and we perpetuate that culture from generation to generation. I once had a gentleman who was being added to my church, baptized by me and brought into the faith. But he'd grown up Japanese American, and had actually grown up with his parents, having been in the internment during World War II. And he grew up going to Baptist, or not Baptist, going to Buddhist church, and he called it church. And I thought, well, that's interesting. What do they do in a Buddhist church? And he said, well, we learn Japanese and we learn how to be polite and how to do these things. And I said, oh, the church is a carrier of culture. The church is the place we go to learn our culture. And I was more aware of it by looking at somebody else's expression than our own. Oops, sorry. Anyway, it's how we get organized. It makes it things manageable. It gives systems, support, relations, and discipline to all the disparate areas of our lives. It defines behavior and survival behavior. It gives us social comfort zones. It offers us the same kinds of beliefs and teaches us communication cues and forms. Now, I'm not necessarily a fan of maintaining strong cultural ties for people who come to America. I think they ought to learn English. I think they ought to learn our culture and become part of it, but also keeping some of the values and the symbols and the foods and the different charming things also adds to America's greater richness in being able to share these cultures. Prejudices versus discrimination. And please interrupt me with questions if you get to any place that you'll have something to say. I'm just gassing on here. What is a prejudice? It indicates a point of view, a value system, a predetermined reaction to some action or group. It creates a bias, an awful, and often social misunderstandings. But prejudice doesn't mean discrimination. Prejudice means you're predetermined to like this or dislike that. And we all have our tastes. We may like this flavor of ice cream and hate that kind of sandwich. And that doesn't mean we're being bad or discriminatory. It just means we like or dislike certain things. If it's a racial type or a certain culture that we are disliking in general, that's discrimination. I would say that's more a problem, and I don't want to encourage any kind of discrimination among chaplains. But we do have things we like more than others. That's something we can be aware of. Our prejudices and our discriminations are socially learned and often can have misconceptions. When prejudice is liking or not liking things, it's not a violation, as I said, nor is it insensitive behavior. Well, we've got a particular captain with a Chico Police Department who will come into the room when we're all having a potluck, and beautiful things that even have been brought from a store and just unwrapped, and he won't touch a piece of it. He has a complete disliking of any common food. He'll have his own at his own home, but he just can't do it. So just got to understand his culture, which is pretty small. Anyway, liking Motown music or Italian food or long hair is a prejudice. That is, it's a predetermination of a like or dislike, but it's not insensitive. Disliking rap, Cajun food, and skinhead styles may be likewise. I just don't care that much for rap. Discrimination may be an illegal or inappropriate action or behavior if it's pushed that far. Giving a different treatment due to unfair categorizations of somebody can be wrong, and it certainly isn't encouraged among chaplains. Denial of justice promoted by a prejudice, or rather discrimination, is something bad. Prejudice acted out against other people would be discrimination. Stereotyping versus profiling. There are great science around not stereotyping, but profiling. Cops always have to be doing this. Well, we'll get to this, but what do you call in quick radio talk a white male adult? He's a WMA. And that's the radio talk that the dispatchers will have with the cops in the field. A BMA is a black male adult. That's not a prejudicial statement. It's description, and we need a physical description of the guy we're looking for, because we gotta identify him and call him out from the rest of the crowd. BMA, white shirt, dark colored shorts, and yellow tennis shoes. Okay, now we've got a pretty much of a beat on it, and that's not discriminatory. That's just a kind of a profile or a visual. Stereotyping can be a perceived oversimplified generalization that creates negative or positive beliefs about a group and members of that group. This is always based on discrimination against recognized groups. So stereotyping, all black guys is this and that, or Mexicans is this and that, is a stereotype, and it would be discriminatory. Profiling, though, is knowledge-based. It's using facts to verify and defend an opinion. Profiling has become a hot topic in law enforcement because race is often used to justify a search, traffic stop, etc. But profiling can take the clues that were offered and synthesize a kind of a sense of who we're after, based on the type of evidence we're looking at, and the kind of crimes that's being committed. Now, there are cultural types in Butte County. There's an awful lot of white people, but we do have some subcultures that are other races and groups. Of course, there's a Christian culture here. There's white culture, if you can call it a culture. There's Jewish culture. There's Hmongs, the Southeast Asians. There are Native Americans here. There are Black, of course, people, and Hispanic people, Muslim people among all of these cultures. And characteristics of each of these cultures we can speak of. They don't always neatly set themselves up as to one thing or another. There is a Christian culture, but within Christian culture, there's a lot of very wide differences of types of expression. There is the Catholic appearance of worship. There is a charismatic type. There's even Pentecostal that they all look pretty different. But what sets Christians apart? Well, we believe that Jesus is God and the Bible is true. And after that, loving God, we pursue him. So is it a culture? Is it one culture if you've got this kind of variety of expressions? Anybody have an opinion? I'm open. Okay, moving along. There is Jewish culture. In fact, we've been very much aware of Jewish culture and Jewish presence in our country recently because of all the outpouring of anti-Semitic sentiment after the Palestinian invasion. Wow, it's pretty hard to watch that and say, I can jive with that. It is horrendously bad to be against Jews as Jews. But what sets Jews apart? It is certain that even though they lost their homeland 2,000 years ago, when the Romans destroyed Jerusalem and drove them out from the Israel proper, and they were kept from having a homeland for almost 2,000 years until 1947. This group of people has managed to stay together. They're scarcely under a percentage of the world population, and yet they have a very strong bond and sense of themselves, and they've kept their culture together through all kinds of means. Religious faith is one of it, but there's also a sense of common culture and a sort of pride in it, and a sense of having been discriminated against for a really long time, which is the truth. So what sets them apart? Their history, a racial identity, a sense of the culture, their various feasts and fasts and disciplines throughout the year. Part of these things we've participated in, part of them we've co-opted. within Christianity. Their Passover is our Good Friday and Easter, and so forth. Their Pentecost is our Pentecost. Is it one culture? Well, there are a variety of Jews in America. There are cultural Jews who know that they are Jewish by descent, but they don't practice the religion. And there are the religious Jews too. The Hmongs among us. What sets Hmongs apart? Well, they're a racial group, and you can see them, and they look different than the rest of us. Usually, it's the first or maybe just 1.5 generations in, and all the kids after that become very American. They talk English. They don't speak much of the original Hmong language. I know that our church right here at Third and Salem, across the street, is now the Music Connection, but it was for many years a funeral parlor. It was built as a funeral home. It was called Bidwell Chapel, and that was the one place in town where Hmong funerals would be held. And the Hmong funeral would take place over a weekend and tie that place up for about 4 straight days and nights, 24 hours a day. They would lay heavy plastic down inside their chapel, because they did live animal sacrifices as part of the ritual for a traditional Hmong person. That would cut out the use of the parking lot, which we had used. Our congregation and myself would park back there. So they would tell us ahead of time, we got a Hmong funeral this weekend. You can't use the parking lot. So we were aware of that. We've been here in this location 28 years. So and the history of that has gone from 4 or 5 of those a year down to nothing. And now, of course, they sold it off. It's no longer a funeral home. And I think the Hmong funerals like that have gone down to very, very few or none. So the Hmongs are becoming more incorporated into U.S. culture, but they have a proud heritage. They came here as kind of tragic heroes of the Vietnam War era, because these were not those who we were fighting against. They were actually fighting on our side. And when we lost that engagement, they lost too, and they had to flee for their lives. And they're here as our guests and a part of our world. White people. Martin Mullner, a comic, did a movie on white people, and he made it like an archaeological dig, getting surprised at things white people do. I don't know what sets whites apart. We're certainly the dominant culture by number, although we're certainly not that as in the state of California. If you take the aggregate racial bodies, we're less than 50%, but we still have a significant portion. I don't know, is it a culture? I'm Danish American. Just recently had my 23andMe DNA sampling that gave me like an 89% Scandinavian rate. So I don't know, that's white culture, but I'm Dano-American. Is it one culture? I don't know, hardly. I think we're too big to be uniform. There's a lot of little subcultures that make up the white race. And I don't want to have a white church. I'd like to have a racially diverse church, because I don't think the white church says the right things. Not for me, anyway. Black culture or African American culture. Now, not all Blacks are African American, because they're not from Africa. They can be Jamaican and have more of an identity for that, or they may be from somewhere else. At any rate, but Blacks are about 14%, I suppose, of the American population. What sets them apart? Well, some of them, a good portion of them, descended from the slaves that were brought over as Africans at one time. several centuries ago. That was a sad chapter in American history, but this is a group that has lived and thrived and contributed very well in our world. And there's a strong flavoring in our mixed culture of their presence, and I relish it. I find it very, very um, important to me, and I love them, and I think they're beautiful. Um, that one little picture with eyes so happy and eating a watermelon, I'm using as a racial stereotype, something that was considered regular. I grew up in the 50s and in the 60s, and they were still showing these cartoons from the, I guess, the 40s or something like that, where blacks were always depicted as having the big lips and the rolling eyes and the uh, nappy hair and dancing and shucking and juving and griving and jiving. And that was just normal. And I had to unlearn that idea that that's how you depict Black folks. Anyway, Hispanics, what sets Hispanics apart? Well, they certainly have their own very strong culture. They have their language, the Spanish language. They are not one people only. We have an Hispanic priest in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I just went and visited, but he's from Peru, and he was a Catholic priest who came over and became an Anglican priest among us, and so he's Peruvian. They got a very different kind of diet than the Mexicans do, but a very colorful and important, and certainly a large ethnic swatch of the state of California and the Southwest of America. All right, Native Americans. Should we call them Indians or not? Hey, does anybody object to this, to the Washington Redskins being called Redskins? I get a no vote on that, so I agree. We mean nothing against that to call that out, but somebody decided to be offended, so I'm sorry about that. The Redskins is a great team, and we cheer them. Still have the Kansas City Chiefs.
Crazy thing is, the crazy thing is the Native Americans aren't offended by the Redskins name.
No, that's what I've heard. They're
Hopefully,
proud of that.
white people who caused that.
Now they're the Commanders or something, and I don't think there's any personality in that name. Yeah, it's unfortunate. People get upset. I think it's mainly white people getting upset on the name of somebody else. Doesn't understand. What sets them apart? Well, they have an incredibly deep, long connection with this land, obviously. They are immigrants from a lot longer ago, presumably came over from Asia on a land bridge in the Bering Straits, but they have been here for God knows how many thousands of years, and they're very connected with this land. And there's a rich spiritual element. There's an interesting thing here. As a chaplain, I was once called to a woman lying in state. I can say it wasn't a funeral because it was her home. She had died. It was yeah, you might call it 11:44, but she was in her home lying on a bed and had died. And but she was the pastor, the Christian pastor of this native group of Hmongs, not Hmongs, Maidus. And her home was kind of behind the area behind the Sierra Nevada brewery. And for several hours, we stood by to make sure that safety would be not an issue, me and an officer. And people came and visited her body and cried and did their proper mourning, and then socialized outside that room. And there were guys from like gangs, and there were serious people, and the cops were not interested in getting anybody in trouble. It was just a matter of keeping the peace. And it was a very interesting moment of culture there for that Christian culture, but a subculture of these special Maidus. anyways, at one culture, gosh, there are so many different Indian tribes in different senses. My dad, most of you don't know, was a Hollywood actor, and he acted in a movie shot in 1950 called The Savage, which was starring Charlton Heston. And my dad and Heston and the leading lady of the movie, at the end of the movie, they shot this in South Dakota, where the actual Sioux were the extras who played themselves, played the Sioux Indians for this movie. And they had my dad and Heston and this woman come and be inducted into the Sioux tribe officially, with the dance and the smoke and the gifts and the campfire and the circle. They did the whole thing, and it was kind of cool because my dad, when he died a Sioux Indian named Wichuk Pi'ilega, and that's kind of one of my proudest little memories of my pop. Anyhow, racial and cultural slurs, we'd be aware of and to avoid slurs for different kinds of people. I don't want to express them, but I suppose you all understand what some of those are. They're not friendly. They're antagonistic sometimes, and we don't use them. Okay. Now, as soon as you see that picture and study it for a second, you see kind of how cute that is. I don't know of very many Band-Aids that's ever matched my skin color very well, but they're all called skin color. Right? Another illustration of which color is the flesh color crayon. Right? We're different. Now, there is a college culture, and God only knows, some people get into it pretty big time. Speaking of color, this is a pretty wild looking bunch, but college culture can be a very, very powerful and temporary membership in a deep, important time of formation of a young person's life. We, of course, have Chico State here, which is a pretty strong college culture. Butte College has a pretty strong college culture, especially its football program, which has become a nationwide sought out thing since Aaron Rodgers came from there. There is a farm culture in and around the Chico area that it cannot be denied. I'm kind of happy about the fact that we've got a tractor store here in Chico on Martin Luther King Drive, and you can go in there and see tools and things that pertain to a lifestyle that I have no idea about, but it's what they do. And you see the guys in there in their cowboy shirts and their belt buckles and boots and all the way they dress and identify themselves. They are a certain definite culture. There's also cowboy culture, not so much around here, but if you get up to places where there's more livestock and more moving of horses and stock around, you'll see guys who definitely wear the cowboy culture. That's strong. And there is a drug culture, of course, and unfortunately, it's getting stronger and stronger. I suppose you all heard that the state of Oregon legalized the use of cocaine, but they made straws illegal and frustrated the whole effort of driving that home. I hope you find that funny. But the legalization of marijuana in this country is having its effect. I hope it's not as bad as I fear. But it's kind of weird that at the same time we legalize the use of this drug, we also have the American Psychological Association that says that marijuana is a psychotic drug, and we're giving it to people who have car keys. Okay. How does a chaplain encounter racial, cultural, and religious issues? I can say this kind of interesting. You got here an array of chaplains displayed in front of us here. I've gone to several of the ICPC annual conferences and annual training seminars. That's what they call ATS. That have been held at a lot of different places in the country. And so I would go there as a representative of our Chico chaplains, and I'd be the only one of us. And then there's all of these other people, and everybody's a stranger. So if they have a meal they're going to serve you and say everybody can sit down and find a place to sit. I just sat down at a table that had a bunch of other white guys, and they all kind of looked at me and figured out that I wasn't one of them, and they didn't really want to have anything to do with me. And I had that experience a couple of times. So I said, well, heck with that. And I went over and sat down with a table that had mostly black guys in it. They welcomed me. They made me very happy to be there. They said they were very interested in me and where I came from and wanted to share with me. And I went, well, that's it then. When I go to one of these events, I'm sitting with the black people because they're nicer. I don't know why that had to be. But one of them told a story, and I think that was funny. This was at our formal banquet at the end of this event. And he said, well, he had a job as a pastor, so therefore he was qualified to be a chaplain. He was a police chaplain for his Indiana based chaplaincy. And the Indiana, like Michigan, is absolutely fixated on Motor City and the production of automobiles. If you go to Michigan, you find out that the entire state, the number one topic of every conversation is cars, because the car industry runs that state. Well, he was in Indiana, just south of the border from Illinois and just south of Chicago. And he also served as a limo driver. So they would bring him, these chop shops would bring him these gigantic limos that had various purposes, and they'd have him try them out and tell them how he liked the model that they developed for this or that. And so he's this black pastor driving limos and testing them out for people. Well, they brought him this limo one time and said, we want you to check this one out. Look at it. The back end opened up 2 doors, and there was a big room enough for a casket in there. It was a hearse back end. And then in the middle, there was enough seating for 6 pallbearers, so that the guys carrying the casket could be riding in the same coach as the casket. But his comment was, he said, he shook his head and he said, no, not for my people. And they said, why? He says, if you think you're going to get 6 black men in the same car as a dead body, you're out of your mind. And we all laughed and fell down. I enjoyed that a lot. All right, public prayer. When we go out as chaplains, uniformed and identifying with our own police or sheriff's office, we represent them, not our faith, not our church, not that side of our life. We come having been qualified by that. But the first thing we are at those kind of cases is an extension of our city or county by permission from those entities. So we got to watch ourselves. Now, sometimes it is permitted, it's even encouraged for us to express our faith more clearly and tell them all how I love Jesus and address things to him. But if you know that your audience is not necessarily all that, being a little more sensitive and without denying him to say your prayer, Father, so, and this we pray in your most holy name, amen, is not an offensive prayer, and it doesn't back out of the idea that you're a Christian pastor, but you haven't said something that took somebody out of the equation and said, you're not part of this prayer. So that's just something to know. Funerals are not all the same. Funerals in culture can cause us to have some real question as to what are we supposed to do. And sometimes asking questions is really important because the culture is different than what you're familiar with. And funerals are serious matters, easy to offend people with. So we make sure that we're on a solid ground. Okay. Anybody have any questions? You've all been so silent. I thought I lost you.
No, we're here.
Okay. All righty. Let me uncheck. I think now we're back on board. Okay, right? All right. Certainly any questions anybody have on any of that matters. Okay, I'm going to pause the recording just so that we can take a break. Take now. All right, we're going to our second sharing of screen of the day. This is our class number 10 called Alcohol and Substance Abuse. So not a happy topic, this one, but we'll look at it together and see what we have to say. These statistics on law enforcement officers and chemical dependency lead us to conclude that there is a problem and that chaplains may, from time to time, be called to help with chemical dependency. Now, what is chemical dependency? Millions of Americans are suffering from some kind of chemical dependency. It may be alcohol, narcotics, prescription drugs, etc. Chemical dependency is a major contributing factor in deaths. Chemical dependency is the harmful use of alcohol and of other drugs. It is the continued use of those chemicals, even when they are causing harm. It is using chemicals to deal with feelings and to deal with life itself. A chemical dependency is not just a concept, it is people with a disease, essentially, that affects their body, mind, and spirit. If going untreated, the person may die, go insane, or commit a crime and be locked up. 3 words are used to describe chemical dependency in terms of a sequencing: primary, progressive, and chronic. Primary means first. It means we don't look at the dependency as part of another problem, but that it's become a problem of its own. Progressive is that the problem is getting worse. And finally, chronic is once we get the disease or dependency, we will always have to deal with it and resist it, returning to it. Just a moment, I'm going to close my door. Okay. Now, this graph of alcohol progression is very interesting, and we want to study it in a second. From the left side, you can see people who do not drink. That's the sort of baseline 0. Then you can go through kind of scales of social drinkers. You might have a glass of beer or wine and at the evening with your dinner with your wife and relax a little bit. You're not trying to get drunk. You just loosen up a little bit or enjoy something. And that's pretty benign. But you finally get up to a point where we're having too many of those beers or too many of those glasses of wine or harder stuff every evening and needing it. And you cross the line into abuse. Somewhere after that, as we go toward the center of the scale, there's a loss of control. You have to have the substance now. It's something you can't really live without. And so on the first tier of that, you start developing a tolerance, which means that your body is losing its ability to work with this substance. You're not getting to that place where you want to get very with as much as you normally use. So you start to use more to get to that place of oblivion or transcendence or forgetfulness or whatever it is that you're seeking. And so it accelerates the problem because you get past the point where the body can handle it. Your body is trying to filter out these sorts of substances as though they're toxins, which they essentially are. And the body will accommodate it, but it's also being changed. And there is a physical change that happens in somebody's body. There are neurological passages, there metabolisms, and it's starting to have a serious effect upon their literal health. I remember visiting the bedside of a man in Enloe Hospital who was the son of one of my parishioner members, and he was dying of cirrhosis of the liver, and his skin was the color of a pumpkin, literally. He had turned absolutely orange yellow, and he was told if he ever had another glass of alcohol, he would die from it. And he left the hospital and he took that drink and he died. His physical change was so serious. It does get serious as the further it goes up the scale, because you're in addiction, you're alcohol dependent. This finally leads to a way where you're either going to have to change this, give it up, have recovery, and get your life back again, which God willing is, of course, for anybody's life in this sort of scenario, or going along, continuing in insanity. And so many of the humblest people that we see in our cities these days are literally alcohol insane. They've drunken themselves into this inability to rationally deal with reality, or just death. So recovery is a good step. Insanity or death are the other possibilities, and they're all just as possible. Okay, alcoholism defined. A dependence on alcohol is a disease or an addiction. Calling it a disease doesn't take the responsibility away from the person who's got the disease. He gave it to himself. So I'm not softening that. But it is a disease in the sense that the body has a problem, and it's causing unhealth. Alcoholism is when a drinker has little control over when or how much he drinks, thinks often about drinking, and keeps drinking despite major and continuing problems. Often hidden, the dependency may be denied and signs not recognized. Willpower, determination, and moral knowledge will have less to do with recovery than other forces that we must employ, because the will has been turned over to the alcohol, and the alcohol is itself a new relationship. Psychologically, alcoholism includes psychological dependence, which refer to the drinker's thoughts and feelings about drinking, escapism, relief. Every kind of addiction attaches itself to the center of the brain, the limbic system, which releases hormones that are pleasant and bathe the brain in these pleasant experiences, dopamine. And it says to the body, "Oh, that's better, that's good," and that becomes a dependence, because that feeling of it's good becomes the goal of somebody's life. And so they're always going back to the thing that gives them that feeling. It's also a physical dependence, in that it changes the drinker's reaction to the drug. There's a tolerance built up, the need to consume more of the drug or alcohol to obtain the same result. Or when the drinker needs alcohol in order to function, that gets pretty scary. If a person can't face the day without having a first hair of the dog, he's in serious trouble. The American Medical Association recognizes alcoholism as a disease that can be arrested but not cured. Their definition includes uncontrollable desire, preoccupation, and a loss of control. As long as alcoholics drink, the effects will worsen. If not arrested, that is, they turn over the whole control and they stop drinking altogether, the disease may result in insanity or death, as we said. The only real method of arresting the disease is total and permanent abstinence. A dry alcoholic that returns to drink after years of sobriety will not return to the 0 point where he began to drink. He'll return to the former level of addiction instantly. In other words, needing the high level of alcohol and the sicknesses that were derived by that alcohol abuse. Law enforcement officers and chemical dependency. Law enforcement officers will see more crimes and acts of irresponsibility due to alcohol and drug abuse than anybody in our whole culture. So why would any officer then turn to drugs or booze to solve his or her problems? Let's paint a scenario. An officer becomes a narcotics officer. He knows it all, backwards and forwards. His priorities are law enforcement, weight training, drinking with the boys, and then his family. He builds his life like single men do. He gets injured lifting weights, goes on non-work related injury status. He's off duty. He meets a girl, gets involved with her. She uses cocaine. He's angry for the time he loses her to her drug. So whenever she's stoned, he kind of loses her to what she's doing with the drug. He's already on steroids. He isn't addicted to the steroids. His drug is illegal too. The spiral takes him down and down. Alcohol is a poison in sufficient strength. It can be a contributing factor to depression and suicide. In fact, more than half of suicides are alcohol included in this cluster that creates the suicidal mentality. A high tolerance to alcohol may have a drinker consuming and tolerating levels of alcohol that would have killed the average person. Blood alcohol levels of 0.53 have been recorded on people who survived it. Now, 0.08 is the threshold of breaking the law if you are driving with that level of blood alcohol. How many times more is 0.53 than 0.08? Alcohol interacts with every receptor, neurotransmitter, cell, enzyme, and gene in your body. Long-term abuse has a huge impact on the body in all its functions. An addiction monitor is just an interesting graphic. To like it, to want it, to need it, to crave it. Behaviors and attitudes can include undefinable fears, apathy, negativism, withdrawal and isolation, manipulation, disregard for others' feelings, unreasonable resentments, inappropriate and excessive mood swings. So alcoholism and other drugs can lead to these other uncontrolled senses and feelings. Also aggression, braggadocio, overreacting to criticisms, defensiveness, poor morale, domestic difficulties, legal problems, failure to follow directions, frequent mistakes, and inconsistent work pace, time mismanagement, missed deadlines, poor judgment, conflicting instructions, lax supervision, failure to follow through, minimal work effort, declining productivity, and confusion, and more. Dishonesty, illusion of control, a spiritual bankruptcy, depression, dependency, tunnel vision, self-centeredness, perfectionism, frozen feelings, and ethical deterioration. Then there's enabling. Enabling is any action or inaction by other people that helps the alcoholic avoid the consequences of his or her behavior. Most common form of enabling is simply doing nothing, looking away, remaining silent, although somebody is calling for help. We cover for others, doing others' work when they're hungover or they're just gone. We call in sick for them while they're under the influence. We rationalize or deny it for them. Tell ourselves it's easier to ignore than to just deal with it. Accepting drunkenness as part of the macho police image, which it's been. Allowing an officer to work drunk, which is terrible. Supervisors may become enablers when out of kindness they cover or relieve a drunken employee without implying any discipline. Now, an intervention, how to help. These are hard to do. And I've never been involved with a successful one. I've planned an intervention and helped a family to get their heads wrapped around one, but ultimately we didn't enact it because we felt we knew how this was going to be received. But if it should work, or if it helps to rescue somebody out of a death trap, it's worth the efforts. You first have to realize that an officer is in trouble, ask some questions, learn the patterns of behavior, work with the officer to get the help he or she needs, work with the department for a program of rehabilitation that doesn't penalize for telling the truth, help the family of the officer struggling with the dependents, and never accuse, just confront with facts and loving concern. A recent survey of 2,300 police officers by the National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health reveals that 37% had serious marital problems, 23%, almost a quarter, had serious alcohol problems, 10% have problems with drug abuse. That ain't good. Substance addiction can come from various and surprising places. Now, techniques to employ in an intervention. An intervention was when a group of people, family, co-workers, supervisors, friends, maybe a chaplain, maybe a pastor, everybody who's involved with this person's life, who is their support system, who is their close persons, they're not their drinking buddies, but the people who care about them, makes a referral. That is, they come with this concern. They assess the referral. Here, a professional assistance is needed. There must be some, like a doctor or somebody who knows how this has to work, or somebody who's in professional intervention service. Determine if an intervention is necessary. A lot of times something less stepped up is useful, some intermediate step. To have a conversation, have an assessment questionnaire, work performance evaluation. Is this person able to pull it out of the nosedive with a little bit of side support? Gathering concerned acquaintances, spouse, or others, and those who are, as I mentioned, closely associated with the person. And then develop an intervention plan: who, when, where, arrangements, priorities. Because they're going to have to confront the person. They're going to have to get in a locked room or closed place with him or her and have all these people who are from all corners of this person's life confront them and say, look, you've got a problem with alcohol and we need to have it stopped because we're going to save your life. We love you, and that's why we're doing this. You got to prepare for the hostility that can come out of this, the resistance, the denial, a lot of emotion, a lot of surrender. And why? Well, alcoholism and drug addiction are relationships. Somebody has a relationship with the drug. The relationship, just like a human relationship, just like having an affair or a mistress somewhere, is feeding that midbrain stimulus for these neurological bath of dopamine and these hormones that make you feel like you're okay. It becomes a relationship with its own rituals, its own timing, its own longings, and it's just as real as a relationship having with a wife. So this is a serious break with that relationship that there's being called for. All your other relationships are saying, you do this or you lose us. And you got to choose between the booze and everybody who's around you. And then to determine a willingness for assistance, a readiness for immediate intervention, vacillating, or will follow through. Determine proper level of treatment, inpatient, detox, lockdown facility, whatever it's going to take to break the cycle. An intense outpatient, whatever it is, self-help. See what's going to work. Provide aftercare and accountability. That's important. Every addiction needs an accountability person or group to be able to keep checking on the person. And this guy, like a parolee, has to be on probation, is able to be checked out and determined to still be with the program, or they broke the code and we've got to do something about it. 10 to 15% of the population has addictive personalities. Inside the addictive personality, addiction is a progressive illness. Addiction is in itself a relationship, as I said. The addictive process alters a person's personality. Addiction is a pathological love and trust relationship with an object or an event. The key is it's pathological. An addictive relationship is an abnormal relationship, but it becomes a relationship with a thing or an experience. An addictive personality is a set of traits in response to habit-forming drugs or alcohol or compulsive behaviors. One cannot predict a predisposition to an addiction by looking for an addictive personality. You'll have to just see how somebody enters into life this way. There are 4 kinds of relationship: family or friends, intimate knowledge and caring for oneself, spiritual relationship with God, and relationship with the community around us. The 4 natural and healthy forms of relationship. There are other kinds. The addict will forego all these natural relationships for the addiction. The 4 natural relationships are not always reliable or predictable. Sometimes pain comes that way. Addicts get intensity and intimacy mixed up. The addict falls into a delusion that intensity is intimacy. Sobriety. There are 2 main goals for recovery. Sobriety is the first. To recover from an addiction, a new lifestyle must be learned. The self has to be renewed. The person has to move from being addict-centered to self-centered, and I don't mean selfish, but to recover the self from that addiction that had the prior claims over that person's life. And secondly, conversion. There are several theories and models that outline the addiction process, including these most commonly used models. The medical model says, according to the medical model, an addiction to alcohol or drugs is considered a disease because it is a process that produces characteristic disturbances to many organ systems in the body. Some current research studies show a possible genetic predisposition to addiction. However, the exact gene has not been identified. Research has shown that males with a biological male relative with an alcohol and/or drug addiction are at a high risk for developing addictions too. Females, although to a lesser extent than males, also have a higher risk for developing an addiction if there's a strong family history of this same disorder. Chemical substances alter brain chemistry, and in some cases, the brain may no longer produce natural substances, thus creating a drug dependency. So the drug takes over for chemical substances normally present in the body, and then it becomes necessary to use it to supplant the lost chemical Social learning. Alcohol and drug use is a learned behavior in response to certain stimuli, such as people, events, or feelings, according to this model. Thus, addicts tend to use drugs or alcohol or engage in certain activities when around others engaged in drug use or the activity. They also use because of the resulting feeling. A change in mood caused by the drug is desired and predictable. Arousal, as with some drugs and gambling, a sense of elation, and also satiation, as the drug or activity creates a sense of fullness or numbness from pain. Then there's biopsychosocial. This addiction model is a broad, holistic view of the process of addiction. It incorporates elements from all the models, including the medical and social learning model that I've just described. Once in recovery, former addicts must be aware that the addictive personality remains within them, and the struggle between the self and the addict will continue. During stressful periods, recovering addicts will want to deal with the world through their addictions. The addict side of their personality will always look for an opportunity to reassert itself, to resume control, and to weaken the person again. You know the prayer, God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things that I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. The 12 steps and spiritual awakening. The person comes to believe in himself, others, higher principles, and God. Recovery teaches us how to have relationships. Relationships that heal and nurture are based on negotiation, not on manipulation. The other negotiation is cooperation. We are limited in our control. We have to work with others. We have to get to somewhere by engaging with other people. Other people can be difficult. So 12-step programs are nice because they produce a safe atmosphere where people who are in recovery can build relationships that are supportive. I get it. Okay, my favorite 42. There are probably many more than these. Probably add TikTok to this, but let's look at these 42. And let me say this: if the shoe fits, wear it. Okay. Some of these are going to hit you. An addiction to crime. That's probably not our problem, but some people like to do crime. Muscle relaxants, laziness, or work addiction, workaholics. Alcohol, that's the number one addiction in our country and our culture right now. Antidepressants. I'm not saying you shouldn't ever use those. Some people have to have them, but it can be kind of an addiction too. Barbiturates, caffeine. Now, don't talk personally about me. Cocaine. As I said, Oregon made straws illegal, so they can't use the cocaine that they just legalized. Codependency. We mentioned codependency is the behavior of people who make excuses for or help in their addiction, their addict, their husband or their wife who's addicted. I can tell this story because we have a little time. I once made a death notification on a gentleman who lived in Chico, who had a wife who was a bad drug addict. She was on stuff, I guess methamphetamine or something like that, so much that she wasn't in the house a lot. She'd be gone for 2 or 3 days and come home. This was a nice man, and he lived well, and they had a nice home together. Had a very important job, but his wife was just a junkie, and so we had to go tell him that she was found up in Quincy. This was in the winter, and her car had gone over an embankment and down a cliff, and she was the driver, and she died in the automobile. Her drug dealer was the passenger in the car, and he was fine, of course. Um, and this is the news that I had to give him. And he was, you know, sorrowful and wept, of course, and had bad news. He felt it was something like this because she was gone for days before this, and he knew it was going to happen sooner or later. Something was going to tragically hit her, but he had been unable to get her successfully cured of this. I'm not saying that he was codependent, but he may have been. Um, just living with this and being under it, living with a drug dependent person is a terrible experience. And there are people who will literally, uh, let's say there's somebody who grew up in an alcoholic home and their parents were always drunk and they were the adult in the family, and they kept the house clean and they made the excuses and made the lunches for their little sisters and sent them off to school and acted as though they were the parent because their drunken dad and mom were too out of it to help. This person goes off and marries a drunk. Why? Because that's normal for them. And that can become a pattern. And it's kind of sad. Someone can be addicted to cough medicines. Now, I understand that they're getting rid of the alcohol and cough medicines, but they have other drugs in there, codeine being one of them. Being addicted to diuretics. I don't know about that. That's never mind. I guess it's just one of the list. Other kinds of drugs, of course, there's an endless number of those. Or trying new drugs. I don't know if you all heard the song by Donovan, Mellow Yellow, but it went along with a rumor that scraping the inside of banana peels and baking them in an oven for a certain number of time and rolling them and smoking them or something like that. I mean, I'm not stupid enough. I never was quite stupid enough to try this, but I heard of people trying it because the rumor went out that this was the new cool thing to do. Don't do this. I heard it was terrible and I didn't need any more warnings. Addiction to food. Oh my goodness. There is a lot of that out there. Addiction to gambling. There is even more out there. Our addition of all these Indian casinos around us are not helping. And people just go online and gamble. I'm sure you've all seen the ads on your cell phones for games that pay off, that all this money comes pouring off the screen. You see these coins coming and they're going to get you going on making money by playing solitaire on your cell phone. Oh yeah, that doesn't have a downside to it, does it? Hallucinogens, PCP, LSD, and other such psychedelic drugs. Heroin and opiates. And of course, now we've got fentanyl is killing people like crazy. 70 to 100,000 people a year in America. Internet dependency and addiction. Nobody's got that problem, right? Addiction to isolation. Some people want to be alone. Kleptomania, the need to steal, is an addiction, a strange propensity for some people. Marijuana, of course, comes under that drug title. Masturbation can be an addiction. Some guys I've heard want to do it like 10, 20 times a day, and I'm thinking, ouch. But at any rate, narcotics are also fall under the drug category. Nicotine, of course, smoking addiction becomes a need. Overachieving, now that doesn't sound as bad as nicotine, but it can be something that's debilitating for people. Overeating, which goes with food. Overworking, which goes with workaholics. Painkillers, another kind of drug. Now, I have had a lot more calls out with found dead bodies, 1144s, for people who've taken prescription drugs, generally not their own, but they bought them on the street, and they're painkillers, and they took too many of them and they killed themselves. They washed it down with a couple of beers. And this OxyContin should have worked and made them feel good, because it usually does. And they woke up dead. Painkillers can kill you. Addiction to people pleasing. All us pastors don't know anything about this one, where we feel it's our job to keep everybody happy. Perfectionism, another addiction. Pornography is one of the most common addictions in America today, where more than half of the men are addicted literally to pornography. It's gotten so easy to get to on our cell phones and on our computer screens. Prescription drugs, as I mentioned, painkillers are part of that. Sadism, that sounds pretty awful, but that's true. Some people. Sex addictions, a lot of sex addictions of various kinds. And there are treatments, by the way, and there are groups that are supportive and helpful to get over those sex addictions and pornography addictions. Shopping addictions, we always associate that with mama, but sometimes it can be us guys. Sleeping addictions, there is a condition called narcolepsy, and I had a woman who was a narcoleptic in one of my congregations, who was just very depressed and narcoleptic, and she told me about it. Sleeping pills, needing to use sleeping pills to always sleep. Smoking, going along with the nicotine. Sniffing solvents, or chuffing. There are guys who will take the propellant from like ladies' hairspray and put it in a bag and then sniff that stuff and smell it, because it gives them an instant high. It also freezes their brain and turns it into sugar crystals, but never mind. Then stimulants like diet pills and amphetamines. Therapy addictions, needing to go to more and more and more and more therapists, because or self-help. And Valium is another drug that helps people because it's makes you feel so good. All right, I'm open to questions. Anybody have anything you would like to share or talk about with addictions, this popular subject?
I assume that the departments have procedures in place to deal with some of these things. So is that something that our sergeants will, let us know about if we become aware of somebody with an issue?
Yeah, they have a secret and free program for mental illness, addictions, problems like this. Mark, you know about this, the IA programs that help officers who get jammed in their profession and are in trouble. And they want to save this guy because it's a big investment they've had in the person and his career. And if they can help him and get through this and get him cured, it's great. If they'll submit to it, it's just the shame factor that keeps them away from facing the issue. We're all big tough guys here, right? So we're all gonna muscle through it, and I'll get by it, and it won't be that bad. And I've got a handle on this. And you keep saying this until you get in a crash, or your wife kicks you out, and your kids won't have anything to do with you, and then so it very often has to get too far. I've known an officer who really drank himself to death, and I'm very sad. I went to his funeral this last year. He was a friend, but he couldn't hack it, and he did not get past the alcohol. But you're right. All the departments have an employment assistance program, and they mean to help their officers with any number of these things. I don't know how many kind of things, Mark, do they offer help for?
Pretty much anything and everything. The main issue, well, obviously the main addiction that I've seen in the past was obviously alcohol. And the culture is that it's okay. It's okay. We you live a hard life. You're out there putting your life on the line and all this kind of other fun stuff. And as a result of that, yeah, you got a party hardy as well.
Yeah.
And you know, when I first started, the first department I worked for, it was not uncommon for us to have choir practice after work.
Y'all know what the term choir practice refers to?
Nope.
It's what the cops used to call going drinking after the after your shift, and the guys that go together and they talk out the day. They'd have a couple of beers, and they'd enjoy each other's personality, and they'd talk and they laugh about these situations, which was a decompression. It was actually a good psychological thing if it hadn't included the alcohol or needed so much alcohol. There gets to be too much of that. Same thing happened in the painting business when the painters were done. They were famous for it. So go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, it just it was accepted, and it was kind of expected in a lot of cases. And you know, if I know sometimes it got out of hand. I know it ruined marriages. It wasn't uncommon for male and female officers to hook up after hours, and it just it was really bad. But it was one of those things, like I said, that it's just alcohol. That was the mentality. It's just alcohol, and we can handle this stuff. If there were other things, usually it was if there was any drug addiction, things like that, that really was looked down upon. And if you knew somebody who was starting to use or whatever the case, I remember we had a deputy on my department. I was actually his training officer in the jails. And then when he got out in patrol, he um, got involved with this woman who was a user. He started using methamphetamine and things like that. And I didn't work with him when he was out in patrol, but he ended up actually coming to work, and he was under the influence. And he was called on it several times, didn't get the help. And unfortunately, when you get involved in these types of things, you start to take on the personalities a lot of times of other users. And he ended up being arrested for domestic violence with this young woman several times, including one time when he was on duty. And that was the final straw when units he lived out of the off his beat and in another neighboring agency, and they got a radio call of a domestic violence situation. They get over there, and there's a sheriff's unit sitting in the driveway, and he's in uniform, and he's just smacking the crap out of her inside the house, and he got hooked up in uniform, and that was the end.
Yeah. You kind of want to stop it before it gets there, or it's all over for somebody's lifestyle. That's bad. Yeah. So, well, we never find out any of the officers we're dealing with are having these kinds of issues because they don't talk to you about it. We hope that they come to you that they themselves are bothered by it. We're probably not going to have another officer come and rat him out to you because there's the code of honor. So it's going to be difficult to break into this ourselves, but prayerfully, we need to care about our officers and know that that stuff can happen to them. And if we do have the opportunity to help stop the downfall of one of our cops, that's a very important duty to fulfill. We will see a lot of drug addiction and alcoholism on the streets. And as we go with officers to calls, that's what we're seeing. Methamphetamine face is something that I like the posters that show before and after, here's what she looked like, at such and such a date, and 6 months later using meth, what her face went to. I mean, I wish that made more of an impression on people. Have you all seen those posters? Mm-hmm. They're pretty impressive. I mean, you just look at this and say, why would anybody take this junk? It's like shooting yourself in the face with a shotgun and knocking out half your teeth. What are you doing this for? Don't you know you just lost all your beauty? But then there are recoveries. I mean, I've known some wonderful people who had been on meth and been on meth for a while and got off of it altogether. It's a death sentence. I I would I'd make it a hanging sentence for anybody who cooks and sells that stuff, because it's murder. It really is murder. Even if they don't die of it, they're dead. So this stuff is bad. Um, but people will do these kinds of things that they fall into as a normal, even a what would seem to be a normal response to an abnormal life or situation they're in, because the pressures are there. But when the drug itself is creating the pressures, and then it's the solution to the pressures, and it becomes this cycle, it's a pretty tight spiral, and it can really take them out. So we care about the people that we're going out to see in the public. We can't take time with them and solve all their problems, but maybe we can point them in the right direction for the moments we have with them, the triage. Otherwise, we're out there for the officers, and we're out there to care and love them, because addiction is not a game. It's loss of control. And one thing that an officer needs to have is control. That's what they are. That's their identity, is to step into a situation and take control. And when they're out of control themselves, what a contradiction in life. Well, Mr. Jeffrey, will you pray us out of here today?
Bishop, real quick.
Yes, sir.
I just wanted to bring something up that kind of falls into place with this, with the addictions and things like that as well. And what we discussed last week in regards to law enforcement suicides. I don't know if you guys had heard about what happened down in LA County. They actually had 4 officers commit suicide over a 24-hour period.
I heard that.
Yeah, one of the officers was he'd been retired, I don't know how long, but then 3 of them were active duty. And I thought I read somewhere where they thought maybe alcohol may have played a part in at least 1 or 2 of them. So it is something that is starting to become more prevalent in law enforcement, and it's taken more officers' lives than actual on-duty deaths.
Was it just coincidental that the 4 of them died in that close cluster, or was there any relationship between them established that one influenced another or something?
I had not heard of any interaction between them. I know one of them supposedly was a commander on the department, so quite high up, which is almost unheard of.
Yeah.
And he had been somebody who basically had been the face of the department, because he was involved in their media relations, had appeared on camera quite often, and things like that. So seeing somebody that high up take their life, or learning of that, maybe that was a factor in 1 or 2 of them. I don't know.
Well, what we pray about when we hear about cop suicides too is that it doesn't seem to normalize that as a solution to the rest of the troops, because especially if you have a supervisor who eats his gun, we're making it seem like it's okay, and it's not okay. And you don't want anybody to follow suit with that, but it can be really devastating to a department. I fortunately haven't experienced in the Chico PD in my time any cop suicides among us. But the one I mentioned who drank himself to death could be called that, because it's just a long-term suicide. He drank himself to death over the period of 20 years. And I'm really sad about it.
Bishop Ashman.
I will.
I've unfortunately had 2 partners that have killed themselves.
Yeah.
Both of them were accused of well, one of them was accused of molesting his own son, which it turned out it didn't happen. The son later recanted, but he took his own life because of it.
Oh, ouch. Yeah. These are the people we care for, so we hold their lives in our hands. Go out and love them to pieces. God bless you all. We'll see you next Thursday. Then we'll have a break. before we end this thing. Okay, take care.